Hey, this is an exciting moment. I'm sitting down with Dr. Margaret Nagib. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
There's so many ways to pronounce it. That works.
I
Nagib
felt like I
works.
messed it up.
No, I say Nagib, but
Nagib,
the proper
Doctor
pronunciation, yeah.
Dr. Margaret Nagib. Margaret is a psychologist, doctor. She has a lot of stuff that she is packing. I actually meet with Margaret when I'm in a place of need, sit down with a therapist, counselor, and all those moments together have been just gold. So much life. So thanks for joining us today, Margaret. How are you?
My pleasure. I'm doing great. It's a bit rainy today outside, but it makes it cozy. I like cozy, so I'm doing good.
You're back in the Chicago area, so you're in that part of the nation. So there's some weather already coming upon us.
Yeah, yeah. Fall is hinting.
Yes, and so we're in this discovery, this dive on mental health, and I figured who better to talk to than somebody that helps me keep my mental health in order. So I'm happy that you're with us. Let's dive in. Talk about what you do, your role in the mental health space, and maybe also that'd be good to hear how you ended up there.
Yeah, sure. So my technical title is clinical psychologist.
Okay.
And let's see, I started my master's in 1995. So I've been around for a while. I got my doctorate in 2000 and have been pretty much practicing ever since then. And so I've had a variety of roles. I've been in a variety of settings. Most currently, I'm doing a lot of private practice, speaking, training. But interestingly, as I reflect, the role I've had in the mental health space is primarily as a bridge between faith and psychology. So I do a lot of bringing psychology to the realms of faith, like churches and ministries.
Okay.
And I do a lot of bringing faith to the realm of psychology. So that has been the theme from day one, Lance,
Wow.
being this bridge. It's been really an honor and so fun. So fun.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. It sounds extremely valuable. I think would you say there has been an unhealthy separation in that space in years past? Do you see that growing, like the bridge connecting in terms of like sometimes in the faith environment, we would, I don't know, turn up our noses towards psychology and counseling and just say, pray, get it right with God. And so do you
Yeah,
see that maybe like coming together and shifting or?
totally. I've seen so much of a shift just in my time. So
Yeah.
I was pretty privileged that when I entered grad school, Christian psychology was already kind of at its peak. So I think the evangelical realm, we can really credit the evangelical realm for really the first to bring psychology in any really formative way. But even since then, the field of psychology as a whole, spirituality is so important now in a way that it wasn't when I went to grad school back in the 90s. So it's exciting on multiple levels, both in the secular psychology field and the Christian psychology field.
Yeah, I love that you said that because I only mentioned the like faith towards psychology negative, but it's like psychology towards faith was pretty negative, and now there's
Yeah.
that blend. I love it.
There's still those pockets, but for the most part, I think churches are more open to it. Even denominations that weren't as open in the past,
Yeah.
are very open to it and seeing the value of it. And that ultimately, it's so fun when I look at a psychology theory and I'm like, oh, that's biblical. They got that idea. There's nothing new under the sun. That's already in the scripture that was written, thousands of years ago. So for me personally, I don't think there's much of a divide in truth when it comes to science and faith. If you really dig into science and faith, they seem to mirror each other pretty well.
Yeah, that's very encouraging.
Yeah.
How about how you stepped into this space? Did you fall into this? Was there like a real drive and motivation? Like some of your why behind stepping into becoming a clinical psychologist?
I smile because I knew at a young age, some people were like, I want to be a nurse or I want to be a teacher. And I was like, I want to be a counselor. I just knew. So I think I've always been kind of precocious, a little more introverted, very curious about behavior because I was quiet,
Yeah.
and I knew I wanted to help people. So I was pretty lucky that my path was pretty clear from a young age.
Yeah.
Even in high school, I started pursuing psychology and then just never stopped.
Wow. Yeah. That does sound like a really unique grace to have that clarity. What a
Yeah.
blessing. And the process of studying and being in like a more formed, I mean, obviously as you do your work, you're being formed, but in the season before you're physically working, you're studying, what was that like? I'm imagining there was like a lot of gold you were mining.
It was amazing. I went to college, undergrad in psychology, and then went straight into grad school. And I was able to go to a Christian grad school that integrated faith and psychology.
Okay.
But interestingly enough, you learn pretty early on in this field that your own work is just as valuable, if not more valuable, than what you learn in a textbook. So
Yeah.
early on, I mean, within the first semester of grad school, I had some pretty big family tragedy happen.
Okay.
And so it was this parallel process of learning, the science and the craft of psychology, but then doing this really real work with God about existential issues, psychological issues, faith, as I was just dealing with life stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you're doing personal work, you become more useful to those you're meeting with. I'm imagining like you can't
Absolutely.
engage in that soul realm just from your head, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you're only, the famous quote, you can only bring people as far as you've gone yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
What would you say are some of your bigger influences as you're learning and kind of discovering your framework for sitting with people and working with people? Are there like figures that you say inspired you? Is it all biblical? I don't know. It's probably a mishmash, right?
Oh my gosh, it's such a mishmash for sure. Um, I, I mean, certainly I went into the field. I went to a Christian grad school because I wanted to learn how to integrate faith and psychology.
Yeah.
But it really wasn't until I left grad school that I think I knew how to operationalize that.
Okay.
And honestly, I have a lot to owe to the field of inner healing, which is not even psychology.
Okay.
So inner healing completely transformed how I do work with people more than anything else.
Wow, that's profound.
Yeah.
So that's like probably your strongest tool as you're sitting with people is that inner healing influence. And
Yeah, well, it makes sense. If God called me to be a bridge, then
Yeah.
part of that is learning how to bring people into the throne room as they're doing their soul work.
I love it.
Yeah.
It's exciting. So let's talk a little bit about the subject at hand. So mental health. What is mental health? Like, how would you define mental health? Is it just like I feel good about myself, or what do you think?
Yeah. Well, that word mental health is a little bit deceptive because it just has as you focus on the mind.
Yeah.
And psychology actually is much broader than just the mind. It's a huge part of it. But, the word psychology comes from the Greek word in the New Testament, psyche, which is the word soul.
Wow.
And that Greek word, as we know, means mind, will, and emotions. So psychology is the study of the mind, will, and emotions. So mental health then, to me, is integrity between what you think and feel. So you're aligned, what you think is aligned with your values, your spirit, your identity, your purpose.
Wow.
And when there's integrity between those three, we do feel good. So it's kind of silly when people minimize it too. Is it just about feeling good? Well, physical health is about feeling good too.
Yeah.
And when you don't feel good, that's how you know something's off. And it's the same thing with mental health. When you don't feel good, there's more for you. There's something off.
Yeah. Wow, I've never heard that. That is beautiful. Talk a little bit about that, the integrity between the three realms and how you're feeling and how it really is. Like, what do you mean by integrity there?
Well, I mean, it's funny, there's everything's in threes, right? So it's body, mind, spirit.
Mm.
But then within the realm of the soul, it's mind, will, and emotions. And
Mm.
Lance is different than Margaret. The only difference between Lance and Margaret as far as personality is how you think and how you see the world affects how you feel and what you do. So I see the world differently and feel differently and process emotions differently, and that's what makes up my personality. It's kind of the formula: change the feel and the think and the do, and it creates another type of way of being in the universe. So
Yeah.
ultimately, there has to be integrity. So for example, I think of when Paul says, why do I do the things that I don't want to do and the things I want to do? I don't know. Well, that was the battle in his psyche, the battle in his soul between what he wants to do and what he actually does, what he believes to be true and what he actually does. Yeah. So when you sit down with a counselor, they pull out what you think, what you feel, what you do, and actually get you to think about your own thinking. Yeah. And is this really lining up with who you are, who God made you, and who you want to be, and how you want to live and move and be in this world? And if it doesn't, well, we tweak some of it. We either tweak how you manage emotion, thoughts, or behavior, and they all affect the other. So if we tweak your behavior, it changes how you think and feel. If you tweak how you think, it affects how you feel and what you do. So that's what I mean by integrity, is where you're in alignment with the truth of who you are and who God made you. Yeah, that's profound though, like seeing that all connected, and if something gets out of balance, the integrity starts to suffer, and it's rocky, it's shaky. Yeah. I love that. What would you, without, who we are, we're not in a therapy session or a counseling appointment, but some of the things that you would do in a moment where somebody's integrity is out of balance. You mentioned inner healing earlier. What would like that process of change start to look like as you're working with folks? And again, I understand it's a process. Sure. It's not just one moment. Potentially, it could be a moment, but usually it's a process. Yeah. So, I guess at first you gather information, right? Someone comes in with their presenting problem or concern. And so the way I gather information, God showed me in kind of this in 2009. He used 1 Thessalonians as my grid. So he said, Margaret, people are body, their soul, and their spirit. So when you listen to them, think about what's happening with their body, what's happening with their soul, what's happening with their spirit. So you want to address those needs, but there's also a divine order. So it's our spirit in submission to God's spirit, and then mind and body in submission to our spirit. Okay. Often when people come to me and they have some kind of issue, something's out of whack. Yeah. And it's affecting the divine order. So instead of their spirit kind of being the CEO, so to speak, maybe their body, with someone with an addiction, for example, their body, the drives of their body and the addiction are driving them. Wow. And it's like their mind's out the window. They just need to meet this need, right? And they're kind of a shell of who they really are. It's like, why? Because they're held captive to this addiction. So I need to get that alignment back on, where it's spirit, soul, body, which if you think about an addiction, the 12 steps, step 1 is I admit that I'm powerless and I need a power greater than myself. I have to no longer make the addiction my God, but God, my God. So you think body, soul, spirit, what are the issues in each, address them. If there's physiological issues, you address them, spiritual. And then how do I get them in proper alignment? Body, soul, spirit, in submission to God. Yeah. And you're like taking time, and it's like it's unpacking itself. Yeah. Talk about some of the joys that you experience in that process. I'm just thinking, like in the work that you do, what brings you joy? Yeah. Maybe like highlights. I don't know if we're talking about telling people stories, but. Yeah. Well, the famous thing people say when they find out what I do is like, how do you do that? How do you sit and listen to people's problems all day? And they want to give me an award, Okay. And I want to say to them, I love it. And the only reason I love it and do what I do is because healing is real. There's some really simple things that we can do that are super powerful. And not only, so when I think of mental health and the facets of mental health, we often think of recovery, so I have depression or I have an addiction or I have trauma from my past and I need to recover. And that's absolutely true. So one piece of it is recovering from the past, restoring what God originally intended. It's the same thing with social justice. It starts with healing the past, right? But then the other part of it is wholeness.
Yeah.
So it doesn't stop at recovery. The whole point of recovery is to get you to live in wholeness. Why? So you can fulfill your destiny. And that's what social justice is about too. It's like, and it's throughout the Bible. It's God restoring, recovering. Why? For wholeness, and because he wants to establish justice and righteousness in the land. And then, if you look at Isaiah 9, it's all the good feels. Why? Because he wants you to have a measurable joy, it says. It's not even like happy. It's like these, what seem unrealistic expectations for joy, peace. So to me, gosh, I forget your original question. I kind of just riffed on that for a bit, but so my joy is it's real.
Yeah.
And it's partnering in God's design to restore and redeem.
Yeah.
And then see people live out their destiny. And that's when it gets really fun.
I love that.
You never know what's going to happen. And you get to see people literally bloom right before your eyes.
Well, I love how you start. I love the whole answer, but I love how you started the answer. You mentioned that people are like, oh my God, how do you do that? How do you listen to people's problems all day long? And your answer is like, no, it's actually really a joyful process, because you're talking about the end game of people thriving.
Yes.
Why do you think, why do you think there's such a stigma around this whole idea of like, I want to see people thriving, and therapy or counseling is involved in that process? Why would people's gut level reaction be like, oh my God, I can't believe you just sit and listen to people's problems, versus, wow, you get to be a part of healing and seeing people thrive? And so you hear what I'm getting at. Like, do you think there is a social stigma still around this idea of mental health or soul health or?
Yeah. Well, I think it's changed a lot. I think it's improved a lot. I think with every generation, now we have the, I forget which app it is. We have these apps now, and one of them, it kind of makes me a little mad, maybe because I'm a therapist, but one of their taglines is a therapist. It's like having a therapist in your pocket. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is hysterical. Yeah. But that's where we're at now. Like, yeah, pull out your app and talk to your therapist.
Okay.
When I talk to like millennials and younger, they're very without any stigma. Like, oh yeah, my therapist. Like, it's actually seen as positive thing, like saying, oh, I have a personal trainer. Like, who doesn't want a personal trainer? So it has changed. I think as every generation is, and I think honestly, if you just look at what God's doing and what's happening in society, it's pushing us. Like every time we advance technologically, and every way we advance, we are being pushed to go deeper and to go higher with who God intended us to be. So I'm encouraged. But yes, there's still a stigma.
But you see the trend going the other way. That's really encouraging to hear.
Yeah, for sure.
And you would put that shift on. There's a general propensity towards depth, just generally speaking, like with technology and the advancement of society. It's like everyone wants to go deeper versus just surface.
Well, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Psych 101, as a collective, human race, we are advancing. There's still poverty, there's still basic needs, but on the whole, people are advancing in more than their basic needs are being met. And so the more you go higher on that list, the more it's now about actualizing spirituality, existential issues, purpose.
Yeah.
And you can't really go there without, once again, healing to move forward in those areas.
I love it. Anything that you'd want people that are not in your shoes to know about the work, like difficulties that you guys face, not like woe is me, but like like context, it's like maybe even the way we approach you as a therapist that's helpful, and ways that we may approach our therapists that are not helpful. Because again, this moment is like learning. It's like we want to learn. Those are all the conversations we're having. Is just like open our eyes, help us see things that maybe we didn't know before,
Yeah. So what is helpful in approaching your therapist and what is not helpful? Well, it's like any other relationship. The more you put in it, the more you get out of it.
Yeah.
And it's really about giving yourself permission to be vulnerable. And that can be hard and scary, with a therapist, but that every therapist that you sit down with just wants to be a safe place for you.
Okay.
If there's anywhere in the world for you to practice being vulnerable, it's one of the safest environments to do that. And part of the reason why it's safe and different than maybe like with someone you trust, a friend, is that my goal is I'm 100% for you. This is not about me.
Yeah.
I'm trained to not make it about me. And so I am just here to help you sort out what you need to sort out.
Yeah.
And that is tremendous. That is a tremendous gift. And so, but you have to be a little brave.
Yep.
And just come in and just be honest about whatever it is that you're feeling. So the only challenge I ever face really as a therapist is when people are really, really struggling to just be honest about where. Mm-hmm.
Why do you think people won't crack it open? Like if they've made the step to come towards you, which sounds like courage in and of itself, to like pursue a counselor, pursue a therapist. Mm-hmm. What do you think keeps us as humans back from that vulnerability, that exchange of openness?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing a child needs is attunement. They need attunement and responsiveness. Mm. And if there's any neglect in those areas, even from well-meaning parents, where you didn't get a sense of like this person, I mean, think about it. I just described a therapist and how they just attune, but it's the same thing as a good parent. Like it's all about this kid.
Okay.
So many years, and I'm so attuned and I'm responding and I'm engaging with them. Yep. And so if you haven't had that, it's hard to have a grid for it. It's part of what you do in therapy is having, we call it a corrective experience, a corrective emotional experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why there's probably, if anyone hears this, people are gonna be like, I want to meet with this gal. Like you're describing a huge human need, like somebody's gonna be safe and be totally just tuned into me, and that sounds really good. What about change? Like as you talk about, people are typically coming because there's some problem that they want to get fixed or some pain that they want to get relieved. Yeah. Does the change process, I don't know, I feel like it's difficult, but I bet you would say otherwise.
I guess it depends on what you're trying to change.
Yes, okay.
But change is difficult for different reasons, depending, right? But much of what we know and do is it's been conditioned in us. I mean, that's a very real reality that it's conditioned. And so it's conditioning is like a habit. So if you've ever tried to break a habit of whatever, biting your nails or whatever, it is hard. It takes a lot of consciousness, awareness. It takes some tolerance of what's uncomfortable, So yeah, change can be hard, but the goal with the therapist is they know where you want to go and they know how to titrate it so that you can have wins along the way.
Okay.
So you feel yourself growing and strengthening as you get there, and they know how to pace you and encourage you, so that you're recognizing the gains as you go and you're making small goals as you go. Yeah. So it's not just like, oh, we've got this huge mountain to climb and it's going to be horrible the whole way.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I have in my journey, I recognize therapists, counselors, like they are healers among us. Mm-hmm. And everything I hear you describing, it's like, yeah, I'm in the process of, I'm in this space of healing with people. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. I would absolutely agree with that.
Talk a bit about the process that you've been in with, like, you're talking about being a bridge builder between faith and non-faith. Like share some of that. It sounds like that's just been part of your resume. It's just been a part of what you do. You said from day one, it's just kind of been the focus.
Totally.
Any stories to share there that have been encouraging for you or good for the church to know about? Most of our audience really is the church as we're doing Justice Collective stuff, but
Yeah. I have so many stories. How do I pick one? Yeah. Well, I think the first time I ever did inner healing with a client, I stumbled upon inner healing. I was
okay.
at the bookstore. I saw some inner healing materials. I didn't know it was inner healing. If I had known it was inner healing, I wouldn't have bought the materials. Because even though I went to a great school that integrated faith and psychology, inner healing was kind of seen as, well, that's not science. It's not evidence-based, So
Okay.
God, Jehovah's sneaky, kind of like got around that.
Nice.
But then that week, a client came in to see me who I hadn't seen in years, or in about a year. I had treated her for a severe eating disorder.
Okay.
And she was kind of had her fill of therapy and took a break for a little while. But when she came back, she said that she really wanted to go to the next level in her relationship with God and in her eating disorder work. So I felt led to just go ahead and use the tools with her,
Wow.
even though I had no clue what I was doing. And had no guidance other than God and Holy Spirit. And she was very brave because she knew me and trusted me. And I said, well, this is kind of funny, but this is what this inner healing says it does. So let's give it a shot. Long story short, I walked out of that session. It was a 3-hour session, probably because I've never done it before, but also because it was so amazing. And
Okay.
she was completely healed of her eating disorder. And she was like, pretty severe on the eating disorder realm. And if anyone has ever worked with eating disorders, there's just such a stronghold with the eating disorder.
Okay.
And what was interesting is God kind of led us through things. We had these, moments where we would look at each other like, oh, because we had worked together for so long and we had touched on all of these things. And yet God had this way of like, just zooming in, right? And in this miraculous way that he does, just taking care of it.
Yeah.
But I learned such a lesson that day about the integration of body, soul, and spirit. Because at the end of the day, the reason why she walked out whole was because of this one thing that has baffled Christian psychologists since I've been in the world of Christian psychology, which is what's spiritual and what's just natural and psychological.
Ah, yeah.
So certainly with eating disorders, there's physical issues, there's very clear psychological issues. But what we had never touched on, even though she saw me for years and I'm a Christian therapist, what we had never touched on, because I didn't know how to touch on it at that point, was just one spiritual hold that needed to break. The minute that broke, that's when her healing came flooding in.
Wow.
She basically had a moment. God said to me, ask her to ask me what the eating disorder looks like to me. So she said, God, what's the eating disorder look like to you? And God literally, it was like he turned on this horror movie in her head, because as she began to see what she was really partnering with. So at some point, I'm not saying that everything has a spirit behind it,
Sure.
but at some point there was an agreement,
Yeah.
right, with this thing of darkness that she started to believe was keeping her afloat, keeping her alive, that she needed it. And God literally unveiled, like 1 Corinthians, unveiled her eyes.
Wow.
And she saw it. And that's why she was in horror when she saw it. And that's all it took. The minute she saw what it was and how horrible it was and how it was just there to hurt her, she broke off agreements with it. And that's all it took.
Wow.
And, she was in her late 20s and a believer her whole life. But the next time she came in to see me a week later, it was this whole new connection with God that she had never had before, because of this spiritual stronghold that we didn't even realize was so clearly this piece of it that needed to break. So that was the first time I saw it happen. And I've seen it a gazillion times in other situations.
And what did she do? So when she saw what this thing was and
Yeah.
the malintent back
Yeah.
towards her, what
Yeah.
is it that she did to like she just broke an agreement? She what?
Yeah. Well, a little backstory on her. Part of her thing was she also had an exercise addiction. So
Okay.
she would go to the forest preserves and walk every day for like 4 hours. And part of that was for exercise, but part of it was we used the metaphor of her lover. We called him Ed, short for eating disorder. And she would talk about how she just wanted to get away and just be with the eating disorder, where nobody would tell her what to eat, And so what God showed her was actually a picture of her in the forest preserve with this dark figure. That was Ed.
Yeah.
That's who was, seducing her, basically.
Yeah.
And so she saw that. And part of it, I don't even fully know. Her story's in my book. What was happening, God was doing so much. I just remember she opened her eyes and she said, Margaret, I'm done. I'm done with that thing.
Wow.
And I was
So
like,
that's the will. Like, so she made
yeah,
a
she
decision.
took authority and said, I'm done. And then I just led her through a simple prayer. Like,
Okay.
okay, I see you. And I break off all agreement in Jesus' name. And that was it.
That's beautiful.
And her life is completely transformed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. I love that integration, like a professional trained doctor, you're bringing in the supernatural, the spiritual realm. I can see how academia or medicine would kind of poo-poo the idea of inner healing, but you're bringing it all together, and that feels like the total package. Feels
similar to a physical healing,
yeah.
She no longer carries that diagnosis. She could go to any psychotherapist and they would assess her and they would say, well, you don't really have an eating disorder anymore.
Yeah.
Same thing as if you had a physical healing and you send someone to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, you don't have cancer anymore.
Yeah. It's beautiful. I want people to know about your book. Talk about the book that you have. I think it's very recently published. Is that correct?
Well, it was actually published in 2017.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just have been talking about it lately more.
All right.
It's called Souls Like Stars. And renew your mind, heal your heart, unveil your shine. It's based on the principle that when we step into the throne room, God unveils and we radiate his likeness and in his glory. Wow. So it's a very practical 10 chapters. Each chapter covers kind of a major tenet in psychology, like emotions, relationship, desire, purpose. And so it gives you some psychology, some really practical tools, but then it's all about bringing you into the throne room. So the questions are crafted to actually have you encounter God and let God do the work.
I see.
While also gaining some really practical soul skills.
That sounds beautiful. So where would people find this?
Amazon, just put in Souls Like Stars or
Souls Like Stars.
Like Stars, or even just put in my name in Amazon and it'll pop up.
It's great. Yeah, I'm so encouraged talking to you. I'm so appreciative of you giving us time like this. Is there anything else on your mind that I haven't directed us towards? It's been fascinating. I feel like we've had a really good conversation. I'm hoping people are feeling encouraged like I am listening to you.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the only thing that's been highlighted to me in this last season, this last year, is how much doing our own inner work actually has such an impact on the collective.
Yeah.
So there's this thing in psychology called parallel process.
Okay.
But when I do my work with God and with myself, it changes how I am in the world and how I interact in the world. And that's ultimately, I think, what's going to bring change and hope and all the beautiful things that we all want to see. So the way to do your part, that's really profound, but doable.
Yeah. Any suggestions for people as they are doing their work? Like what are some, obviously reach out to a therapist if that's something that is feeling like a need. Are there other things that you would say?
Yeah, well, the beauty of where we're at right now is there's so many ways. There's coaching, there's online courses, there's books and podcasts more than ever before. Yeah. So I feel like as far as information is concerned, there's every which way to access it. So usually what I tell people is really just sit with the Lord. He knows what you need,
Yeah.
and he will literally guide you. I've seen God guide people to books on a shelf in a bookstore, you know?
That's good.
So just trust God, let him guide you, see what's highlighted to you, and he'll show you. He'll show
That's
you.
great.
Yeah.
Such good advice. And again, thanks for your time, Margaret.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you. So we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you again, Dr. Margaret Nagib. Souls
Like
Good
stars.
title. Souls Like Stars.
Yeah.
Souls Like Stars. Check out that book. Sounds good to me. And we're going to officially wrap this up. So thanks, guys, for joining us.